Hey guys, it's Vanessa from Unmasked. Even with the preliminary hearing still 5 months away, new bits of information keep bubbling to the surface, providing important new clues about what happened in the early morning hours of November 13th. Now, before we get started, please take a few seconds to support Unmasked by liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell, and setting it to all so you'll be notified of all of our upcoming videos on this case and others. Last but definitely not least, please share this video everywhere you can. I'm going to briefly make sure that we're all up to speed and on the same page before I get into the new stuff. So back on the afternoon of January 3rd, days before Bryan Kohberger's highly anticipated probable cause affidavit was released, at the defense's request, the judge issued a gag order. As you probably know, a gag order limits the information that is allowed to be shared with the public or media. The gag order issued that day applied to investigators, all law enforcement personnel, and anyone on either the prosecution side or the defense. With the almost frenzied, insatiable daily need for new information on this case, I had a feeling that we would start to see, friends, acquaintances, neighbors, coworkers, those types of sources start to drop things here and there, and turns out that is exactly what has happened the past week and a half. On Friday, January 13th, both Dateline and 2020 aired specials on the Idaho 4 case. I watched each of them multiple times. I thought they were both done really well, and both of them were a really hard watch at certain points emotionally. Just listening to their friends and family discuss, not only the actual day of the murders and what that experience was like for them, but also just the entire aftermath was completely heartbreaking. We also learned more about Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan's personalities and their friendships. In both Friday night specials, I was surprised to hear brand new information released. Of course, the gag order only applied to law enforcement and the legal teams at that time that the shows aired. I did kind of think to myself while I was watching it, if the new information was going to ruffle any feathers or if there were going to be any consequences. One piece of information in particular that was revealed was that victim Kaylee Gonsalves fought back against her attacker. There was also additional information given, finally, about the 911 call and some details on what happened when officers first arrived on the scene. There was even a friend of the four of them that said that she knew an EMT that had responded to the scene and that he had relayed to her that some of them were even held back from entering the scene because it was so gruesome. Okay, now that we're all caught up, we're going to go back exactly 1 week ago when People magazine put out an article that Bryan Kohberger had sent DMs to one of the victims in late October, just weeks before the murders. People magazine cited their source as a, quote, investigator familiar with the case. According to this article, when Kohberger didn't get a response to his original message, he sent several more messages to her. The source also stated that the messages were kind of along the lines of just, hey, how are you? And that the victim that he messaged to is not specified, but many of us are speculating about, may not have even seen the messages. He said that police are aware of these messages and trying to determine if the victims were aware of Kohberger. The source also referred to Kohberger as, quote, persistent. I saw there was a lot of speculation online about who this source could be. A lot of people were assuming that it wouldn't be a cop because of the gag order. So it could be that it's an investigator hired outside the scope of official law enforcement. But then I also heard today somewhere else that it was possibly a cop from Pennsylvania. So who knows at this point? Bryan's Instagram account is now deleted. However, minutes after Bryan was arrested, a lot of us went in and screenshotted his entire account because we know how this goes. And this was hours before all of the fake troll accounts popped up. The day after the DM information was revealed, an updated gag order was issued by the court, broadening the scope of the original one. The order now includes attorneys representing the victims' families, and any witnesses in the case, and prohibits them from talking to the public about it. Then on the 19th, the day after the new gag order was issued, People magazine put out another article regarding a reported connection between Kohberger and the victims. This time, their source was cited as a former employee of the Mad Greek restaurant where Maddie and Xana used to work. The source told People magazine that Kohberger came in at least twice to grab vegan pizza. Many of us had already felt that it was very likely that the restaurant was the connection due to Brian reportedly being a strict vegan and Mad Greek having a vegan-friendly menu. I've seen a few locals posting that this information is not surprising and that it is a very small area with limited options, so it is a very likely connection. What's really interesting about this piece of information is that he allegedly came in just weeks before the murders, lining up with the Instagram DM information. The source also stated that there wasn't anything particularly alarming about his behavior during these two visits, and that he only remembered him because he had a very particular order and would check to make sure that none of his food had come into contact with animal products. It's not known at this time if Maddie or Xana waited on him or if they interacted with him in any way. The source also stated that investigators have interviewed employees and the owners of the restaurant. They've also allegedly collected surveillance video from the restaurant and the surrounding businesses. I'm assuming this former employee gets around the gag order because they're not a direct witness and they're no longer employed at the restaurant. The owner of Mad Greek fired back the next day with a public statement on Facebook stating that the People magazine article about their restaurant was, quote, not true. It goes on to read that they had agreed not to share anything that could potentially harm the investigation or cause their families more stress. She accuses the source of the People magazine article to be seeking their 5 minutes of fame. She also brings up how disruptive this has been to their business and their daily lives. This is interesting for a few reasons. I'm not going to dispute the merits of the restaurant statement or the People magazine article. However, let's think about this logically for a minute and separate the actual content of the People magazine article from the fact that it appears the restaurant is being bogged down with calls and the quite alarming assertion that employees are being tracked down and harassed at their homes. Two very separate points. Let me just say that in my opinion, I think it's absolutely inexcusable that people feel entitled enough to go track all these people down and even try to reach them at their homes. Not all of us were created equal that report on true crime, and I'm sure that that whole situation is really scary for the employees. I myself have had complete strangers off the internet sent to my door for nefarious reasons, and it's unbelievably scary and it just feels very violating. So I'm likely biased here with my own experiences, but I do not think that that's okay. And if that is the case, get the police involved like I did. There are boundaries, and the sense of entitlement with some of these people online is just disgusting in my humble opinion. So now moving on to the claims about Brian going to the restaurant in the weeks leading up to the murders. I gotta say, you guys, the source is anonymous in this case. We all know that in these high-profile cases, people do make a lot of false claims. It happens all the time. However, because in this case they're anonymous, I'm not sure how I feel about the seeking 5 minutes of fame. I find the statement that he went to the restaurant in October and the weeks leading up to the murder actually very believable. Law enforcement has stated that Brian stalked at least one of the victims for months leading up to the murders. His phone allegedly pinged in the area close enough to try and connect with their Wi-Fi. If he was stalking one of the victims at their home, why would he not go by their work? Makes perfect sense that he would, actually. Also, just to clarify, because I haven't heard a lot of discussion about this, there are two sources for this story about him being at Mad Greek, not just the former employee. The article also cites an investigator familiar with the case as corroborating these statements. I don't necessarily think that he would be remembered by everyone, and if he happened to pay with cash, how is anyone so sure that he didn't come by? With stalkers, there is usually a pattern of escalation before any violence occurs. In my opinion, you can see the escalation in October with different information that's been coming out. He was described as unapproachable and reportedly grading students very harshly up before the murders, which did a complete 180 after the murders. He was reportedly driving by the house on King Road multiple times. He was reportedly DMing one of the victims and not getting a response. And I have a feeling that when we get more information from law enforcement, we will see a clear pattern of escalation in those weeks leading up to the murders. Also, let's not forget something else extremely disturbing that happened just weeks before the murders on October 21st, Buddy the dog. As most of you know, just a few miles away from King Road, an Australian Shepherd was let out by his owners to go to the bathroom like he is every night at the same time. Yet this night, he never returned. The next morning, the owners and some of their neighbors went looking for him and made the shocking and horrific discovery that he had been killed with a knife, skinned, and filleted. It occurred sometime after 2:30 a.m. The sheriff's office came out, and by the owner's own account, they were very disturbed themselves and called for a supervisor. The person responsible for what happened to Buddy is still unknown. I called and spoke to the Latah County Sheriff's Office just a few days before Brian Koberger was arrested, and I requested the report and any associated body cam. I was told by the Sheriff's Office that it wasn't available to me or to the public at all, and that this is still a very active and ongoing investigation. Yes, I realize Brian is vegan. However, my instinct is that he's not vegan based on some kind of belief system, but most likely for weight control and health issues. Not only that, but it just takes a little digging. If you guys get on Google and look it up, you can find very similar crimes in the Poconos, very close to where he lived, and very similar to the circumstances to what happened in Moscow. One in particular was extremely disturbing, and they did find one latex glove by the animal, and they said in the news article that they sent it in for forensic testing, but there's never any follow-up. I know that Murphy was left unharmed, but the killer wasn't there for a dog. He also left people alive in the house. It's not a stretch to think that he wasn't going to waste his time with a dog that's shut in another room. So I guess this could all be coincidence. Are crimes like these really common and I just live in a bubble? My question is, how many coincidences does it take to be a pattern? I guess if there's any connection whatsoever, they'll be able to figure that out with his phone history, and maybe we'll hear about this later in the upcoming months. So I'm going to speculate here for a second. And so for those of you who get highly offended by this, trigger warning. I have felt for a while now that the killer's target was Maddie, and both of these interviews also lead me in that direction. I also think it's possible that the killer meant to sneak in and out, only attacking Maddie, but either Kaylee was in the bed with her, which threw him off, or Kaylee heard a noise, closed Murphy in her bedroom while she went to Maddie's room to investigate, and walked in on the attack. So, was Kaylee in her room playing with Murphy around 4 a.m., as DM reportedly heard? Maybe hears a noise, possibly says someone is here, as is noted in the probable cause documents as either coming from Kaylee or Xana, and then possibly gets out of her bed to go check on Maddie and walks in on what's in progress, which could also explain why Kaylee's injuries were allegedly so much worse than Maddie's. If this killer had multiple fantasies about this night for months and had basically been working up the courage to go do this and then was unexpectedly interrupted, could he have flown into a rage? And that is why Kaylee's injuries were so different. This also ties into my feelings on the knife sheath as well, but I'll hit on that in just a minute. Just because Maddie and Kaylee were found in the same bed doesn't mean that Kaylee didn't walk in, interrupt his attack on Maddie, and end up on the bed with Maddie after she was killed. Murphy being shut in her room has always bothered me and never quite added up. Kaylee's parents said that Murphy always slept with either Kaylee or Maddie, and that he would bark and scratch at the door if he was left alone in a room. I think it makes more sense that Kaylee got up, went to investigate something that she heard, and then shut the door behind her. If she originally went to bed with Maddie, it would make more sense to me that Murphy would be in the room with them. A lot of people have assumed Kaylee was the target because it was disclosed that her injuries were so much worse and because she had basically moved out and had just come back for the weekend to show off her new car and to see Maddie. However, I think the exact opposite may be true. It's very possible that if the killer was indeed stalking Maddie or multiple people in the house, he would know Kaylee hadn't been there and may have thought that Maddie was all alone up there and that he could get in and get out without waking anyone else up. As far as the sheath, there is so much speculation about whether or not the killer left it there on purpose. For now, I'm sticking to my original instinct that it was a huge mistake and not intentional or a calling card, especially if he was interrupted while beginning his attack on Maddie. It would have thrown him off, and as we know, things continued to go sideways from there. I also believe that the knife is hidden somewhere possibly buried somewhere on their property, and that it holds a lot of importance to him. I don't think that he dumped it, and I don't think he would have wanted to leave the sheath there. I think he unsheathed it after sneaking in the back door and up to Maddie's room, and then got interrupted, and his perfect plan was ruined, sending him into a rage. Also, as far as the, what we have to call it on YouTube, SA, we know there were no signs. However, my instinct is that it most likely was part of it. But if we're following the same line of thinking that there was a sudden interruption or, something threw him off and spiraled from there, then that could explain why there were no signs. I've studied plenty of cases before where a murderer's original motivation was SA, but then they either got scared by a witness or the victim fought back, and the entire scenario quickly changed. I don't think at this point we have anywhere near the amount of information to even speculate on that. I've done an extensive amount of research on stalkers over the past year. There are 5 classifications. In my opinion, Brian would be the 5th kind, the predatory stalker, which is the rarest kind, but also the most dangerous. Predatory stalkers are usually male and stalk female victims due to a sexual interest. It usually begins with voyeurism and can either stay at that level or escalate into violence. The target is usually a stranger, and the stalker feels powerful and in control because the victim is completely unaware of what's happening. From the beginning, their intent is usually to harm or to kill their target. Some of the most common traits of a predatory stalker are narcissism, obsessive-compulsive disorders, being socially awkward, a control freak, and unable to take rejection. We already know that Brian had been by the house at least 12 times. It will be interesting to see what comes out in the future about any potential stalking behaviors leading up to November 13th. I wanted to add these photos in. Someone sent them to me and I thought they were really interesting. The college football Apple Cup was held at Washington State University on November 26th, less than 2 weeks after the murders. These pics were posted in a CrimeCon Facebook group earlier, and I have to agree, this person looks a lot like Brian Kohberger. What's really interesting about this pic is that he's much more bundled than the rest of the people there. He has his face and hands completely covered, and his eyes have like the black dark circles around them and are close together, a lot like Brian's. And yes, of course, he has bushy eyebrows. So I don't know, you guys tell me in comments if you think that looks like Brian. And of course, the newest thing that everyone's been talking about, this just came out last evening that I saw. It came out that Brian's public defender, Ann Taylor, was formerly representing Xana Kernodle's mom, Kara, on some misdemeanor charges. She filed an attorney withdrawal notice on January 5th, the same day Kohberger made his first court appearance in Latah County due to the obvious conflict of interest. So it looks like we won't be seeing, or shouldn't be seeing, any additional interviews from anyone close to the case with this new gag order. So what do you guys think? As interesting as they are these new pieces of information bad for the case? And do you think that they are the catalyst for the new order? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As I posted on Unmasked community wall, we will be reporting live daily from Moscow the week of the preliminary hearing. Right now, it's scheduled for the last week of June. More on that as the date gets closer and as we know 100% that it's going to happen. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe and see you next video.